We have got an excellent episode of Lessons from Last Time coming up for you. And, people oftentimes want to know how we get our guests for Lessons from Last Time. And a lot of times they are friends of ours, they're colleagues, they're people that we've worked with, they're people who we just know a lot about. And then sometimes it's somebody who was attending a seminar and then walked up to me afterwards and said, I kind of have a story, and somebody who's willing to share it. So that's what we've got for you this week. Chuck Adkins, thank you for joining us, brother.
Glad to be here. Really am. Excited to share the story.
It was so awesome after that seminar, the amount of people who came up and told me their story of just that struggle. And I mentioned in my keynote that everybody in that room probably has something that they've been through that they have gotten to the other side of. You seem to have quite a few of those. And so we're going to break down some of those things that you've been through and the ways you've made it through a lot of those circumstances in your life. And I want to start back in the law enforcement days, because I worked for the police department for 3 years and loved it. But also I found there's a lot of things people don't understand about those who work in the police department. There's a lot of your friendships kind of change as you get in. You end up being part of a culture when you're in there. And so how long did you work in law enforcement?
I was roughly in probably about 6 years total.
Was that always a dream?
I'm sorry?
Was that kind of your dream? Like that's what you wanted to do?
Not really. I mean, I went to college, got out of college, was just kind of bouncing around, and I always wanted to be of service. I always had that in my heart, to be of service somehow, some way. And I come from a long line of military folks, all the way back to the Civil War, all the way through Vietnam. And so I thought about the military, but then my father was like, nah, I don't know, because he had been in the military. So I thought the next best thing is I'll go into law enforcement and I'll serve, on our local soil here in the community. So it was kind of, that's kind of what pointed me into it, just wanting actually to be of service. So I jumped in with both feet.
That seems to be a common theme of your life, Chuck. Just in our brief conversation the other day, it's finding ways to connect, finding ways to serve seems to be a common theme in the course of your life, even in the midst of adversity.
It is. I've always had that heart of service. I think, I was raised by two wonderful, wonderful parents, and they just taught me that, to be of service, and that's just something I always had in my heart. So that was the reason I jumped in, and I thought I'd give it a whirl and see what it was all about.
It ended in a somewhat frightening and fascinating way. So let's talk about the tail end of your law enforcement career and kind of what came out of that fairly intense experience.
Well, leading up to the end, just real quickly, I had if there was something bad that was going to happen, I was on duty. I mean, it was constant. And, some people can go through their whole careers and never have an incident, but I was always in the spot where you just, where it was rough. And so the end of my career, we had some local DCI agents, they call them, which are undercover drug agents, that went to serve a warrant on a guy. And he decided, no, I'm not going back to prison. He had been in and out of prison his whole life. So in turn, he decided to flee. And then in that process, I ended up in a running gun battle in February with about 12 inches of snow on the ground, and literally could see the bullets hitting the ground around me because the snow would just poof up and blow up, as those bullets were bouncing around me. And I think back on that, I think there had to be angels there pushing the bullets away from me. I mean, it was just a miracle. But there was 4 of us that were involved, in the actual shootout. And he lived, and I'm grateful he did today, so one of us didn't have to live with that. He's actually still in prison, serving 4 life terms for attempted murder ×4. But what happened is after that, I had kind of developed a problem with drinking. I was drinking really after I would get off the job, just to mellow out and to calm down and be able to sleep and get those images out of my head. And well, when that shooting happened, I really, really spiraled out of control. And because it's automatic in most departments that you have to go off duty for so long after shooting. So they send you home anyway. So here I am sitting by myself at home, after this shooting, and it just kind of spiraled out of control. And one morning, my wife woke me up and she said, "Hey, here's the deal. It's the girls and me, or it's the drink." And I said, "I'm done," because I realized that it had got out of control. And it'll be 19 years this June that I've had a drink of alcohol. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm glad that I was able to maintain my sobriety through all the other things.
And longer than that you've had a spouse stay by your side through a few other chapters of adversity and challenge as well.
Yeah, 30 years here in about a week. So yeah, it's incredible that she has stayed through all of what we'll hear about here.
That's amazing. It's so hard because people don't, like I said, they don't understand what it's like to go through any of these things. And most people who work for the police department are never going to be in a gun battle. Like you're right. This is not a normal occurrence, but there are things that drag on you, that wear on you. One of my professors, I was a criminal justice minor. One of my professors said when he was an officer, when he walked in the door, he had a tree outside his house. And he would touch the tree and imagine himself giving all of his pain of the day, all of the things that he had seen, that he had been through, giving it to the tree, and then walking in the door and leaving it there. And then when he came back outside to go to work, he'd pick that stuff back up. I thought that was a pretty cool way of thinking about it, but it's so common that people don't, that they do have alcohol, plays a role, or they've got some sort of thing that they go to try and get rid of that day.
Yeah, and being young, I was young and just not very mature in life experiences. So to be thrown into all that, at such a young age, and like I was telling Kirk yesterday, I wasn't a drinker growing up. I mean, I grew up in a family where I never saw either one of my parents take a drink in my life, and so it just was something I was never around. So I never really did much of it growing up. So really, it was just a Band-Aid is all it was. But then it was that Band-Aid that all of a sudden it was like, there's a problem here. We got to address this, and I did.
Is that so did you get out of the police department at that point?
Well, no, it was funny. Not really funny, but kind of funny. I went back, and I was back only about 3 weeks, and we went to a call that night, and it almost ended up in another shooting. A guy pulled a knife on us and was charging at us, but luckily, we had a deputy that was with us. I worked for the Mills Police Department, which was right outside of Casper, and he had less than lethal beanbag rounds in his shotgun. So he was able to shoot the beanbags at him and put him down that way instead of having to take his life. So after that, I was like, I've always had a desire to chase real estate. And, I had already started dabbling in it, playing around, trying to get some rentals and some things like that. And I thought, I'm gonna give this my all, and I'm just step aside from, I thought for a while at least that I might go back, and I'm going to try, this real estate investing and see where it goes. And that's kind of how it all ended.
It's funny. The friends I have that are in law enforcement talk about how you can't really explain to someone else what it's like to get up every day, knowing that there's very low possibility that you will draw your firearm in a life-threatening situation, and yet you could.
Right.
Or you could serve a domestic, call, and, or you could pull somebody over in the freeway, and you just never know. And it's dealing with that uncertainty that makes that one of the most unique jobs you can have. And it just changes you. And it's interesting that you kind of saw that play out in your own life through two pretty dramatic incidents and just decided, you know what, it's enough of the dark side for a while.
Right. And at the time I had two young girls. My third daughter wasn't even born yet. She came much later in life, but I had two young daughters at home. And I think that played a role too. I thought, I think I could go do something else where I'm not risking this. It just seemed like, I don't know, like I said, every time something was going to happen, it seemed like I was there.
I always say, shoot at me once, shame on you. Chase me with a knife, shame on me. So I think that was where you're like, this is all I've got.
Enough.
I'm moving on. Yeah. And real estate has way fewer shootings. So you move into, was it like from there into commercial real estate at that point, or into rentals, or?
Yeah, I had dabbled in just flipping homes starting out, which most people know what that term means. Taking a old beat up house and turning around and fixing it up, reselling and making a profit. And I'd been doing that kind of on the side while I was in law enforcement, and it was making some, started to almost make more money than I was making as a law enforcement officer. So I knew that I'd be all right. So I just continued down that road that's how it all started. It was by just flipping a few houses, and then it kind of grew into a huge rental portfolio. And then I got into the development side of things, where I was doing huge remodels and developing big commercial buildings and doing high-end apartments and on and on and on. So it just was like a snowball that just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it happened within a matter of about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years, and we were just on top of the world.
Wow. What years are we talking about here? Like what's the market like at this point?
I started in about 2003, and it ended in 2017. So I was telling Kirk that when I went through 2008, I skated right through. It was really weird. I think it's because Wyoming was kind of isolated from all that. It was the major cities, as you know, and where all that was playing out. But I never missed a beat. I mean,
Well, you also were heavily emphasizing in commercial, so you weren't as tied up in residential, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Who was it? Just you leading this thing? Did you have other partners on it? How big was this empire?
Well, I had one main investor that started out with me, and she truly believed in me, and she was great. I mean, and she had a pretty large sum of capital to work with, and was looking, and she had been in real estate her whole life, and had sold her properties all off. Well, she knew, I want to reinvest, but I don't want to deal with it anymore. I just want to invest, make money off investing, and go retire. So her and I developed a great relationship and walked side by side for many years together. She was, and then as things grew, of course, I outgrew her, and then that's, I had to step into the banks and start doing a lot of commercial loans and things like that. And money was so cheap, you guys remember in that time, it was just, so it was great. I mean, like I said, we were on top of the world, just doing great.
As you grew, your associations grew, and you started getting counsel from a variety of different sources, if I understand our conversation correctly. And you started to diversify the ways in which you were going to try to put money to work for you, right? And you got into owning a few car dealerships, if I understood you correctly.
I did, yeah. I ended up, I had a group approach me, and they talked me into it. They said, you've got all your eggs in one basket. You really should diversify. And if something happened, like in '08, and I thought, well, it didn't affect me, but if something major happened, you would be done for. And so they convinced me. So yeah, I jumped in and went in, and before I know it, I owned 3 car dealerships.
Well, you leave law enforcement unscathed, at least ultimately, not emotionally, mentally, or psychologically, but you didn't pay an ultimate price of being in law enforcement. You came close enough that it encouraged you to get out. And you go down a road of starting to build something meaningful for yourself and your family, and you have some pretty significant success doing it. And as you grow in success, you start to attract interest from outside parties. And, diversification is never really a bad idea for anyone's portfolio, but this kind of had a negative outcome. Talk a little bit about the process that occurred as you started going down the road of being involved in the car business.
Well, and part of what makes that, where the reason I did that is like I was telling you yesterday, when we got to a certain point in the real estate business where the money was just flowing like a river, it was more about not making more. It was more about how many more people can we help? That's where that service came back in again, and who can we help? And so I was walking, in so many different areas of different people's lives. And I was the guy that was willing to give you a second chance. I would rent to you, if you went to prison and got out and actually changed your life. I was known as that guy, And so Michelle and I, my wife, it was just so wonderful to be able to help so many, nonprofits, churches, and on, kind of like you were talking about, Ken, going to, was it Honduras and
Guatemala. Yeah.
and and helping the children, and and being able to do things like that just constantly. So so those guys saw that in me, and that's why they approached me and asked me, if I would be willing to jump in and buy these 3 car dealerships and then let them run them.
But in this case, they saw it not as an aspect of your generosity or your compassion. They saw it as a vulnerability. Is that accurate, or did it just kind of?
Yeah, they had a plan from the beginning. They unfortunately had a plan from the beginning, because they did see that kindness and generosity and love for others. I mean, I raised my girls, and my theme always was, you love till it hurts, then you love a little more. And that's just how we did it, and that's the way it was when we had the money and stuff. And so they saw that as a weakness, and they knew they would be able to play me, and that's exactly what they did.
And the car business is its own funny animal in the way in which they make money, and the way in which they interact with the actual manufacturers, and the way in which they manage inventory. And if you're not from that world, you don't necessarily intuitively know how it operates. And 2 people who do understand how it operates would be able to manipulate circumstances and books and inventory in such a way as to consequence you pretty significantly. Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I did not belong in that business at all. And I know that now, because it is a different world. I mean, it really is. And I call them car guys now. I mean, I know a lot of car guys, and it's just a different world, how it operates, how it runs. And I didn't know the red flags until it was too late. But yeah, that's exactly what happened. Was they cooked the books, and in the car business, when you see all that inventory and all those vehicles sitting on these car dealerships, you think, how in the world do they pay for all those? Well, they don't. It's all borrowed money, and they call it a trust. And when you sell that vehicle, that's their collateral, and you then pay back that money for that particular vehicle. So owning 3 car dealerships and selling high-end vehicles, and each dealership was selling about 40 to 50 a month. It doesn't take long to sell or to run up about a $3 million tab if you don't pay it back. And then the problem with it is it's called being out of trust when that happens. And that's actually federal offense. So it's not like if we go out and borrow money and we fail and we have to go into bankruptcy or whatever, in our business, okay, it's a bad deal, but they're actually protected federally. So when that happened, and they said, I was out of trust, they came to me and said, hey, did you know that it was roughly about $3 million out of trust. And it was like I hit a brick wall. I had no clue at all. But again, think about it. It doesn't take long to run up $3 million. And they did it in about 4 weeks between the 3 dealerships.
Incredible.
So you had explain the out of trust things. I'm a little confused. So and I've never understood, and I've always wanted to know how these car dealerships do it, because we've got a couple really high-end car dealerships in town, and in their building, like there's one I can think of, in their building, there's 40 or 50 cars that are all priced at, $50,000 to $100,000. So they buy those cars, right, to resell them, but you're saying they're doing it almost on a line of credit?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. But when I'm not even myself familiar with how they ended up getting federal protection like that, but they do. And again, it is a line of credit. And you go to auction if you're buying high-end used cars, for example, and that's what we sold, was anything roughly between about 30 and 60,000 back then. And you've got this line of credit you can use. So I had a line of credit of about, I don't know, $8 or $9 million so I could use between the 3 of them to buy inventory, and it goes fast. And again, they're taking a huge risk. Think about it. This vehicle that can move around and go, it's not like an asset that we think about, like a home or a real estate property or something like that. They take a huge chance, and they come in and they do inventories. And that's what they had done. They had come in and done an inventory, and that's when they discovered I was out of trust. And that scared me, because, here, ex-cop, thinking I could go to prison, you know, and it just terrified me. I mean, it just shook me to my core.
If you are watching this podcast and you're in the mortgage industry and you haven't checked out the Knowledge Coop, you definitely need to dive into the Knowledge Coop. In there, you will find content and community that will help you grow as an individual by learning everything there is to know about the mortgage industry. If you think you know everything, just dive in and take some classes, because there's always something more you can learn. To be successful in this business, you've got to continually learn. In addition, if you're a company and you want to teach your people in your own environment, we've got that in the Knowledge Coop Enterprise Services. So reach out to us, check out knowledgecoop.com. Definitely join Coop Plus. Let's get back to the podcast.
So you go through these things in law enforcement that affect your mental and emotional state. You make a decision to make a move. You get into real estate and you have some great success. And then you go through something like this that not only affects your mental and emotional state, it affects your psychological state, but it also affected your physical state.
Yes, it did. And that's one of the things that I like to always share when I come on these podcasts is that, I went through, I just beat myself down day after day after day after day. It took a good year and a half to 2 years to almost shut the business down because we had so many assets we had to sell. And as you guys know, you don't just take a $4 million commercial building and go in and say, here, I want to cash this in at the bank. It takes time. You got to have time on yourself. And so here I got these guys breathing down my neck. We're going to press charges. We're going to, you better get us paid. You better do this. And I had a team of attorneys and I hired the best, and they were protecting me. And they finally put the brakes on and said, whoa, if you guys don't back up a little bit, we're going to put everything into bankruptcy and nobody's going to get nothing. And so they bought me some time, but in the meanwhile, yes, I ended up hurting myself so dramatically that a couple years ago, I actually had what you would call almost a nervous breakdown, where I went into such a dark place that I can't even put words to it. I wish I could, but people out there that are listening today or watching that have been there, they know what I'm talking about. It's a terrible, terrible place. It's like you get it on you and you can't get it off of you. And it's just awful. I mean, for a guy that always had such a positive, upbeat, faith-filled life, to be in such a dark spot, it was so bizarre. And so I seeked out help, even though I'm a man, and that's one of the reasons I do a lot of these podcasts, because, men, they believe we can get through it. We're tough, and, in the state of Wyoming, the suicide rate is enormous. And as far as men, it's almost double what it is for women. And that's because, again, they're not seeking the help out. They're not reaching out. They're not saying, I got to do something about this. I got to either get in therapy or maybe take some medicines or, and that's what happened to me. And I was hurting so bad that I finally just said, I can't do this. I've got 2 girls at home. At this time, I'm sorry, I had 3 now. And my wife, again, like you said, leaning on her. And I seek some help. I got some help and I started walking that journey.
It's really interesting that you bring up therapy, because I did wonder when I spoke in Wyoming and I mentioned that I see a therapist, I did wonder, am I in a state that isn't more, that's not as common? And I did look at some of the looks I was getting were interesting, because I was getting a lot of looks of, okay, I'm listening because this isn't normal for, what we experience. And there's this whole, like, just rub some dirt on it mentality of get up, walk it off. We're always told that as guys. Like when we're young, there was no, you need to feel this. Like it was like feelings, get those things out of here as fast as possible. But you reached a point where you're like, I don't have other options. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, it takes that for some people. And now it's the first thing I ask people when they're like, man, I'm really trying to deal with this thing. I'm like, what does your therapist say? Like, you don't have to wait till rock bottom to go find somebody to talk things through with. You could do it right now with right now we're doing some very basic stuff in therapy. I'm not at risk. I just need somebody that understands emotions and feelings and can walk me through that. So for you, I love that you're sharing this, especially a man from Wyoming that is pulled himself up, built his own career, and then is still saying, I needed support, I needed help, because some things are a little bit too big for us to manage alone.
Exactly. And you were brave for doing that in Wyoming, because this state's terrible. I mean, and I love Wyoming, don't get me wrong. So if the Wyoming people are watching or listening, I don't want to upset them. But, cowboys, we're tough. I mean, it's a tough state. And I just, I want men to know that, it's okay. It's okay to do that. And when you had that courage to stand up there and do that, and that's what I do as well on these podcasts. And I talk to other men and I tell them that I do. Hey, I go on these podcasts and I talk about, mental illness and stuff like that, and depression. And some of them are like, wow, wish I had that courage, to do that. So that's the key, that you're exactly right. And when you told your story about what happened with you and going through COVID and everything, I thought I've got to talk to him and tell him, that, hey, I understand what you're talking about. I've been there, and yes, there's hope. There's hope. Let's put it that way. If you're willing to make that first step, and that first step is, as Kurt and I talked about yesterday, I need some help. What do I do?
It's funny, a guy who's so wired to help others has to get to a fairly dark place before he says, hey, I need help.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, because I tell everybody, I joke about, having 3 girls, that I'm in touch with my feminine side very much, so I should be able to, because I always kind of been, I can relate to girls, raising girls. I wouldn't even know what to do with a boy, but yet I still had that mentality because that's the way I grew up. I also had a father that was very tough. And just like you said, Ken, just rub some dirt in it. It'll be okay. Just get back up. It'll be all right. And then you just go back generation to generation from there, and it just got worse. We're just coming to the beginning of this. And you talked about AI 2 years ago when you were here. You talked about mental illness this time, because we're just getting to a point where people aren't so scared to talk about it anymore. Let's talk about it. Let's get it out there. Let's help people. Let's find a way, and I'm so glad to be a part of that. I mean, we wouldn't be sitting here doing this 10 years ago. This would be no way.
Yeah. Back when they called them shrinks. And
Yep.
so I want to go back to something you said, because I think it's interesting and it applies to a lot of people that listen to this podcast. So sometimes people have great success at something, and that success gets them a lot of money, and they have so much money that they can start investing in other areas, right? I've seen this so much with mortgage people where they go, I think with all this money, and I have a friend who knows the restaurant business, I'm just going to invest in, now I own a restaurant, and now I own a boat sale company, and now I own and they start basically taking on these opportunities because they have the money to do it, but they don't stop and think, do I love the restaurant business? Because it's a fickle beast, right? And I've seen some people who love the restaurant business and they can make, amazing things out of it. But you have to stop and say, is this something I really am passionate about? Because you're taking a risk and you experience that. You got into something that you didn't know about. Would you not do that again if you had to go back? Would you do it differently, or would you just stay the hell away from the car dealerships?
I'd stay away from it. I mean, completely away from it. There's only one car dealership that I'll deal with now, one that I trust, because I know behind the scenes, behind the curtain. If you could see behind the curtain where you guys are at, and it would terrify you. I mean, the car business is a crazy, crazy business, and I would absolutely not go down that road again. I would have just stayed with what I loved, what my passion was, and that was real estate. And I would have kept moving down that road, and maybe, put a little money aside besides having it all tied up in properties and things like that. That would have been smart probably, but definitely not the car business.
I'm going to keep coming back to this common theme, which is I have this great desire to help people, whether I'm in law enforcement or whether I'm making a truckload of money in real estate, or whether I'm going to help these guys get, finance their car dealership venture, which was really financing their determination to embezzle money from you, as it turned out, unfortunately. But that I want to help people theme, bringing that full circle to what you're doing now and the work you're doing now, having come through that whole process. Let's talk a little bit about the work you're involved in now and how you got there.
Well, it's crazy. I went from the big profit world down to the nonprofit world. So actually, that's why we were at the convention that Ken was speaking at, was because we're a nonprofit called Wyoming Housing Network. And what we are is we're HUD housing counselors. And so now I get to give back. I do the first time home buyer side of things. I work with people that are trying to get into rentals. Wyoming Housing Network has many properties around the state that are income based, because they're allowed to do that as a nonprofit as long as HUD's involved and there's an investor involved and things like that. So we get to help many of those folks that just want a place to live, because they're on a very, very tight fixed income. And so it brings back a lot of those memories of when I got to do those things to help people. And I've told my executive director that's here, and she's a wonderful, wonderful person. Just, I can't speak, highly about her. She's just wonderful. I told her that I didn't accidentally roll in here. This was a God thing. Because my faith is very important to me, and I kept seeking that, saying, God, where can I go? I don't have the financial resources anymore. You had a purpose and a reason for what happened. I know that. But where can I go to help people, and give back on the real estate side? Because that's what I really know. And here I am now. So now I'm sitting in a nonprofit world, getting to work every day with folks and helping them and loving it. I've got to walk through some really interesting stuff being here and helping folks from not losing their homes to not losing their apartment to, buying their first house and knowing how to do that, and get them on the right track and setting that foundation so they don't fail and go bankrupt or something. So yeah, it's wonderful.
Do you still have real estate that you're invested in?
I started to rebuild a little bit. I have a few. It's funny. I was telling Kirk, I never could really get my momentum going again. And I don't know if that's part of the hurt, though. I look back on that side of things a lot of times, and there's so much pain there that I don't want to go there. But I do have a little, a few rentals now that I've invested in and got and rebuild. And I've flipped a few homes again and things like that, but nothing to the level I was at. And honestly, I don't know if I ever want to go back to that level. You are a target. You are a target at that level. And with making that kind of money comes huge responsibility. It really does.
And you talked yesterday, I'm sorry, Ken, you talked yesterday about going from flying on private jets to not flying on private jets. And
yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. We lived a wonderful life. Running around on private jets, lived in a 10,000 square foot home. I'll never forget, when we had to sell the home, the large home, and here I have to go rent a house, after having this huge real estate portfolio, because of what we're going through, I have to go rent a house. You talk about, your ego getting crushed. And so we rent this house, and I'll never forget my little one. I've got a 24-year-old, a 20-year-old, and an 11-year-old. That's the one that came on. I told you that at the conference that I call her God's sense of humor, because we weren't supposed to be able to have any more children. And anyways, when we go into this 2,000 square foot house, we take her into her room, and she's only like, I don't know, 4 years old or something at the time. And she's looking around in her room, and she looks in her closet, and she's looking around, and I'm like, what are you looking for? And she says, where's the bathroom? Because every bedroom in the house we came from had a bathroom in it, And I said, it's right there in that hall. I said, is that okay, honey? And she said, that's just fine. It was awesome. She didn't care. She could care less. She just wanted to be with us,
You talked candidly about the things you gave up you really don't miss. And what's remained constant was this desire to help people and this ability to stay married to someone who clearly loves you and you love Michelle. And then the third thing you talked about was somehow along the way, you got depressed, you got dark, you got broke, but you never got bitter.
No, I didn't. I couldn't. I honestly don't think we'd be sitting here talking right now if I would have. I had to forgive. And again, that goes back to my faith and knowing, that I needed to do that. And now, does that mean I want to go hang out with these guys? No, but I had to let it go, and I could not become bitter. And I didn't want to become bitter. I mean, I did for a while. I'm not going to lie to you. I didn't run up and down the streets going, I lost everything. It's great. This is fantastic. I mean, so yes, there was bitterness, but eventually there comes a point in your life where you've got to make that decision. Am I going to stay here, or am I going to move out of this? And how do I move out of this? How do I move out of this bitterness? And luckily I knew how to do that, by the way I grew up and the parents I grew up with. I had two wonderful mother and father that taught me that. And grateful for that I was able to forgive and get rid of that bitterness and be able to move on, with my life and continue the best I could. Because like you said, and I want people to know this, we joke around about the big house. We joke around about the jet. You know what? I could care less about that stuff now. It wasn't the stuff that sent me spiraling into that deep depression that I lost. It was being able to take the funds that came from those businesses and help people. That's what I missed. I told you yesterday, it was more like a ministry than it was a business. And it was like I lost my ministry. So it'd be just like a pastor losing his pulpit or whatever. It was brutal. And that's what hurt the worst. I get choked up right now just talking about it, because I miss it so much. And I still do. I do. But my wife reminds me, the wife of 30 years, that does love me deeply, that, Chuck, you're helping people every day now, and it doesn't have to be with money. And I'm grateful for that.
I have a kind of wrapping up here. I have a parenting question for you. How open were you with the girls about the things you were going through, both business-wise as well as emotionally?
Very open. And I'm glad you asked me that, because the little one didn't understand it. She does now. And as she gets older, I tell her, because I really believe it was meant to be, because she helped me through that time, even though she was so little, because of her childlike faith. But my girls today tell me, Dad, I don't think we would be the girls we are if we would have continued, down the path that we were on, because I did spoil them rotten, and I shouldn't have. They had the brand new cars, they had the big house and all that, and anything they wanted. I've got my oldest daughter now serving in ministry full time. My middle daughter in college doing wonderful, and the youngest one is a fine child. And the two oldest ones have said that. They've said, Dad, I don't think we'd be who we are today if things would have continued. So yeah, I mean, that swells me up when I say that. I'm proud of that.
It's so interesting. I actually, when you do a speech, sometimes you walk away and go, oh, I forgot to say that one thing. In Wyoming, I forgot to mention that at the end of my pandemic struggle, Aria came to me, the one who said, would you travel a little bit less this year? At the end of it, she came to me and said that it was actually better that we went through that, because I became a better dad through the struggle. And I think that's the one thing to point out, is that, when you're going through tough times, it refines you and it makes you better. Usually, like it can,
Right.
if you do the right things, and if you go through the journey and you're looking for those like lessons that you can take away, at the end you become a better person, because it
Yeah, definitely.
sharpened you.
And again, they are. I mean, they're wonderful human beings. They love people. They care for people. They know. See, the oldest one, she knew how to give back. She when she started in college, she started working, or she joined a group called Campus Ventures, and it's nationwide. You probably heard of it. And when she got out of college, she wanted to serve. So that's how she ended up into full-time ministry. And so she had that servant's heart as well. And so does my middle one. All because of the things we went through and the things that we were able to show by example when we did have things.
Chuck, one of the themes that's pretty consistent on Lessons from Last Time, it was certainly part of my story, and it's been part of many of the stories we've heard, is this idea of just getting back up. And I like that. And I like that phrase, but it's kind of incomplete. It's not just about grit. It's not just about finding the determination to get back up. Sometimes the way you get back up is you reach your hand up and somebody grabs your hand and helps you get back up. And it's that combination of grittiness and determination, but also recognizing when I'm at my end and I need help and saying, it's time to get back up. Would you mind giving me a hand? And I appreciate that that's beautifully woven in your story through many different characters and many different experiences.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I had to do. And I had so many fine people come along. I mean, one lady in my life, she's a nurse practitioner. It's funny because I went to many doctors, but I ended up with a nurse practitioner, and she's my angel. And I tell her that, and I say it on every podcast, you know, that Angela Neff is my angel. You know, she just saved me, you know, and was able to come alongside of me and get me back to where I wasn't living in that darkness anymore.
Well, your story is compelling and it's fascinating, and undoubtedly there's going to be people listening to this who might kind of, I wish I could ask him a question or two. So how can people get a hold of you, Chuck, if they wanted to dig deeper into part of your story?
I always give out my personal email, and I'm more than willing to answer you. It might take me a little bit of time. We get busy sometimes, and but I try to check it frequently. But the email address is chuck1312000@gmail.com. So that's chuck1312000@gmail.com. Try to get a Gmail account with the first name Chuck.
Yeah, that's good luck. Well,
Right.
Fortunately, we have somebody here taking copious notes, and that'll be put on the screen as well. So we'll put that information up on the screen.
I've got one final question for you. So here it goes.
I'm nervous.
Don't be. We've gotten great response to this. So you have the ability to go back and talk to 10-year-old Chuck. You walk up, he's running around the playground, and you get to give him one piece of advice based on everything you've experienced in your life. What's the one piece of advice you give to 10-year-old you if you have the chance?
Well, if I could go back and tell the 10-year-old Chuck, I would probably tell him maybe to be a little wiser, not to lose that compassion and that love for others, but just to be a little wiser, you know, and to know that there is people in this world, as we all know, as we all went through 2008, that are going to do the wrong thing and they're going to hurt people. And so I would tell myself that. I would say, Chuck, you love like you did, but just be wise. Just be wise.
I love it. I always say it sucks you don't get wisdom till way later, and you need it way earlier.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's been a treat having you on, Chuck.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how much we appreciate it.
Yeah.
Really enjoy the time with you here on Lessons from Last Time.
Well, thanks for having me. And sorry, I got a little choked up there. Sometimes I just,
never be sorry for that, Chuck. Never be sorry for that.
yeah,
That's
and
human emotion, and we love it.
yeah, I just get, sometimes it just rolls back up, but I hope you guys, I hope this worked for you. I hope it works well for you. I hope it gets a good response and helps you guys continue to grow. So
Thank you so much, Chuck. We'll see you next time.
be careful.